The first time I saw her, she looked like someone who had just walked out of a storm, drenched in silence, her eyes carrying more stories than words could ever tell. It was raining that evening, the kind of cold drizzle that soaks into your bones and makes the whole world seem tired. I was fixing a broken light bulb in the narrow corridor of my old quiet house when I heard the faint knock on the gate. When I opened it, there she stood, a young woman in her early 20s, her hair tied in a messy ponytail. Holding a small suitcase with trembling hands, she looked lost, not just in direction, but in life itself. "Are you the landlord?" she asked softly. Her voice was shaky but polite, as if afraid of being turned away. "Yes," I replied, setting the screwdriver aside. "Do you need something?" She hesitated for a moment, looked down, and then said, "I saw your advertisement. You rent out rooms. I need one just for a few months." Something about the way she said it made me pause. There was a fragility in her tone. The kind you hear when someone's running away from something they can't name. And then she smiled faintly, though her eyes didn't match the smile, and said, "Maybe you're a good landlord." I didn't know what to say, so I simply asked, "Will you return?" She frowned slightly, confused by the question. I didn't mean it literally. But something about her told me she wasn't just renting a room. She was looking for a place to breathe. Again, before we go deeper into the story, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the beauty of helping strangers heal, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. Let's spread hope together. Her name was Aisha. She was 23, recently graduated, and said she worked as a part-time teacher at a local school. She paid the rent on time, didn't ask for much, and mostly kept to herself. But the silence around her was heavy, like a thick fog that lingered even after she left the room. I, on the other hand, was 38, a widower who had learned to live in quiet solitude. My wife, Sarah, had passed away 5 years earlier. Since then, I've been renting out the spare rooms in our old family house to make ends meet. Some tenants came and went, but Aisha was different. She wasn't loud or troublesome. In fact, she barely spoke yet. Her silence had a story behind it. I could sense it every time I saw her staring at the garden from her window. Lost in thoughts she never shared. One evening, I was cleaning the porch when I noticed her sitting on the steps, her arms wrapped around her knees. The sunset bathed her face in a faint orange glow, and for the first time, she looked peaceful. But then I saw the faint bruise near her wrist. I didn't ask. Not then. People who come to rent rooms often bring baggage heavier than their suitcases. I respected her space. Days turned into weeks. She slowly began to open up, not through words, but through gestures. She started leaving a small cup of tea for me on the kitchen counter in the morning. She watered the plants in the garden when I forgot. She'd hummed softly while hanging her clothes in the backyard, and the sound would somehow make the house feel alive again. It had been years since laughter or warmth had filled these walls. And somehow, without realizing it, she brought both back. But every time I tried to talk to her about life, about her work, about her family, she'd change the subject or retreat to her room. The wall she had built around her was invisible yet unbreakable. One rainy night, much like the one when she first arrived, I heard quiet sobs from her room. They were soft, almost swallowed by the rain outside, but unmistakable. I hesitated at first, then gently knocked on her door. No answer. I opened it slightly, and there she was sitting on the floor, clutching a framed photo to her chest, tears streaming down her face. When she saw me, she quickly wiped her face and whispered, I'm sorry. I'll be fine. I didn't know what to say. So, I just sat down across from her on the floor. Sometimes silence is the only language that helps. After a long pause, she whispered. He said he'd come back, but he never did. That night, she told me her story. Aisha had been engaged to a man she loved deeply. He was charming, kind, and promised her a life full of dreams. But a few months before their wedding, he disappeared. No calls, no messages, no goodbye. She later found out he had left the country, chasing his career, leaving her to face the shame, gossip, and heartbreak alone. Her family blamed her for trusting too easily. Her mother told her to move on, but she couldn't. She lost faith in people, in promises, and in herself. That's when she saw my rental ad and decided to start over. Far away from everything that reminded her of him, listening to her broke something inside me. Because in her pain, I saw my own reflection. When Sarah died, I too had stopped believing in new beginnings. After that night, things slowly began to change. We didn't talk about pain anymore. Instead, we talked about life, about books, about food, about little things. She'd cook sometimes and I'd help her fix things around the house. She started smiling more and I started smiling, too. There were evenings when we'd sit in the garden sipping tea in silence, watching the sky turn from orange to deep blue. It was peaceful, familiar, healing. One day, as I was repairing the fence, she came out and said, "You know, you're not a bad landlord after all." I laughed. "And you're not a bad tenant either." She smiled. "Maybe you're a good landlord." Those words, the same ones she said the day she arrived, hit differently this time. There was warmth behind them. Over the next few months, life found rhythm again. But just when I thought the world had finally turned gentle, fate reminded me it never forgets to test us. One evening, she came home pale and shaken. She didn't speak for hours. When I finally asked what happened, she handed me a letter from her old fiancé. He was back in town. He wanted to meet. I didn't know what to say. She looked torn, her old wounds reopening with every breath. "I don't know if I can face him," she whispered. I told her, sometimes closure isn't about confronting the past. It's about choosing peace for yourself. The next day, she left to meet him. She didn't return that night. I waited 2 days, 3 a week. Her room stayed locked, her things untouched. I began to worry she might never come back. And then one morning, I found an envelope under the door. Inside was a short note. "Thank you for being kind when I didn't believe kindness existed. Thank you for giving me a home when all I wanted was to disappear." He apologized, but I realized I don't need his sorry anymore. I'm leaving the city to start fresh. Maybe one day I'll return not to rent, but to say thank you truly. Maybe you're a good landlord. Don't forget to smile, Aisha. I sat on the porch with that letter for hours. The sun rose and fell, but I didn't move. For the first time in years, I cried. Not out of sadness, but gratitude. Because sometimes people walk into your life not to stay, but to remind you that love in any form can still exist after loss. Months passed. The room remained empty. I couldn't rent it again. It still carried her presence, her laughter, her unspoken words. Every evening, I'd water the plants she once cared for. The garden had grown greener since she left, as if her spirit had stayed behind to watch over it. And then almost a year later, on a quiet Sunday morning, I heard a familiar knock on the gate. When I opened it, there she was standing with a suitcase again. But this time with confidence in her eyes and a smile that reached her heart. "Maybe you're still a good landlord," she said with a teasing grin. I couldn't help but smile back. Will you return this time? She nodded. I think I already did. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever met someone who helped you heal, even for a moment, please take a second to like, comment, and share this video. It helps the channel grow and keeps these stories of hope alive. Before we end, I'd love to know, have you ever met someone who entered your life unexpectedly but changed it forever? Please share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. Because sometimes it's not about who stays the longest.